G'day guys, and today I want to talk about this email that I got from Axiomatic Events. Now Axiomatic Events is the event organiser who organised Lauren Southern and Stefan Molyneux's speaking tour of Australia earlier this year. They seem like a very pro-free speech group, which is good. And unfortunately, after the Melbourne show, wherein about 100 people had a hissy fit and had a riot and things like that, the Victorian government billed Axiomatic Events for police protection, essentially, which is very interesting, considering that Axiomatic Events would have already paid some taxes to the Victorian government or to the state government that would have funded the police. So this essentially is a second round of taxation for no apparent reason. This act of financial intimidation does not bode well for Australia. Axiomatic Events Director Dave Pallow has sent Victorian Police a letter explaining why he is refusing to pay the invoice for $67,000 they sent Axiomatic Events for police services outside the Lauren Southern and Stefan Molyneux live event in Melbourne on the 20th of July. The letter from the solicitor highlights concerns that despite the skill and bravery of police on the ground in dealing with the violent behaviour of extremist individuals and organisations like Antifa, the government appears to blame the victim. Such a penalty gives the appearance of enabling the thug's veto, adding to the injuries extremists can cause by inciting such protests. This ties in, is a good example of something Stefan Molyneux tends to talk about, which is when you have two groups in a society and one is being incredibly violent and one is being peaceful, it is much easier to police the peaceful, and so you will be more heavily policed. So Stefan and Lauren were just there to speak. They weren't there to throw bricks or tip over buses or anything like that. So of course that's much easier to go after than a mob of about 100 violent leftists. Mr. Pallow is concerned that simply paying the crippling bill would create a precedent by which other event organisers around Australia will change or even cancel their plans to hold political events which might attract the unwanted attention of extremists and subsequently an enormous protection bill from law enforcement. Now, Axiomatic Events' legal defence revolves around the Victoria Police Act 2013, which states, "The role of Victoria Police is to serve the Victorian community and uphold the law so as to promote a safe, secure and orderly society." Now, I'm no expert lawyer, but I didn't detect anything in that sentence that says the Victorian police shall extort large fees to people in order to shut their political speech down. And it said nothing about specifically targeting right-wingers, because indeed this does specifically target right-wingers. For evidence, I bring up this Herald Sun article by Andrew Bolt that mentions a union organisation rally in Melbourne in April. This rally saw up to 100,000 supporters flock to the Melbourne CBD, which saw the closure of major roads and tram routes, just like the closing of the Hume Highway the night of the Stefan Molyneux and Lauren Southern's Melbourne show. These organisers were not billed $67,000 for blocking roads and probably rioting as well. Left-wing unions don't get charged protection money from the police, but conservative and right-wing speakers do. Unions don't get charged even when they deliberately and unlawfully block the streets, but conservatives do when they legally and peacefully speak in a hall. This is also not the first time this has occurred. When Milo Yiannopoulos did his speaking tour of Australia in Melbourne again, he was levied a $50,000 fee. I believe Axiomatic Events to the Victorian Police summarise my thoughts in quite a concise and nice manner, so I will quote for them. That such events, referring to political speaking events, have a commercial aspect, in no way deprives citizens attending them of an entitlement to have a recourse to police protection if they are threatened. The victims of politically motivated violence and intimidity conducted at public events are no less entitled to proper police protection merely because they purchased a ticket to participate in an event. Axiomatic is of the view that Victorian police understand that such groups, such as Antifa, follow the same strategy each time political conservatives gather to listen to speeches by other conservatives. This strategy is 1. To announce an intention to organise violent street opposition to the holding of a particular public event and to enlist support for that opposition from the media. 2. to elicit a fear on the part of those arranging the public event that the safety of the participants and attendees may be at risk and cannot be guaranteed without police protection. 3. To rely upon the police to impose massive financial penalties upon those arranging such events, so that these events that have been scheduled are cancelled and those in planning are abandoned. If Victoria Police is obliged to be complicit in this strategy, that is a matter of serious concern. It is subservience of public confidence in the rule of law. Needless to say, this is bad, really bad. Each time a fee like this is levied, it emboldens violent leftists to continue perpetuating this sort of violence. And it is violence. It's not resisting or protesting, as the media might say, it's just political violence. It's quite fascistic in nature, which is highly ironic. Now, who is behind this? Well, first of all, I'd like to quote from Axiomatics' letter to the Victorian Police. I quote, "The police officers with whom Axiomatics dealt with were clearly discomforted by being perceived by the public as particeps criminis in the deliberate shutting down of public meeting promoting views that which other groups disagree with. This leads me to believe this isn't a problem with the rank and file, this comes from higher up, which may be also supported by the fact that despite there being so much police protection in this Melbourne event, with over 100 protesters, only one arrest was made that night. Axiomatic Events, quote, suspects that this particular outcome was a function of decisions made by persons other than those on site, which is to say, don't engage the violent leftists. You got to understand what kind of climate you're in Melbourne. Just quickly, as a by note, Melbourne and Victoria as a whole is basically Australia's California, a very left-leaning, progressive place. I believe they have they have gendered male and female crossing signs, so like you can have a walking female. Just silly, progressive, virtue signalling, things like that. And if we have a look at the Premier for Victoria, who is basically the state governor, since 2014 has been a member of the left-leaning Australian Labor Party, that is one Daniel Andrews. This makes the entire thing reek of a politically partisan hack job from the Victorian government in an effort to shut down political dissidents. This is yet another example of the irony of the progressives wanting diversity of skin colour, diversity of background, diversity of ability, but absolutely being unable to tolerate diversity of opinion. This comes at no wonder, because the progressives' political views on radical egalitarianism are very, very threatened by an open conversation, such as, Australia's a multicultural society. What are we going to do about cultures that don't accept multiculturalism? What are we going to do about cultures that don't accept women's rights? And things of that nature. They need to shut down free speech in order for their ideas to work. They cannot win in a contest of ideas, so they must cheat. So of course, I stand with Axiomatic Events. I see this as a clear example of the state throwing its weight around and trying to shut down speech it does not like. It would be bad for the Victorian government's public image if they rolled down the street with cop cars and use them to disrupt public events, so instead they merely take a hands-off approach and let their Antifa buddies do it for them, essentially. It's very similar to the state militias of Venezuela. It is very clear the Victorian government has no problem with partisan political violence.